Hello everyone and welcome to another Scotsway podcast. And today I'm joined by musician Roberto Cassani to talk about his album Insema We Stand, but I imagine a whole lot more. Hello Roberto.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm well. I thank you for taking the time to have a chat. I think before we talk about the album, let's put it into perspective and hear about how you came up to the point of releasing it. I guess, where does the Roberto Cassani story begin? That's how I'd like to start.
Yeah, well, I was born in Milan, and I lived the first 2 decades of my life in a rural place outside Milan. At the time, there was still such an option. Now it's kind of been swallowed up by the constantly growing city. So I was born and brought up there outside Milan, at a place called Rivolta d'Adda, which is a small town. I loved it there very much. And I started playing music when I was there. However, I got a bit fed up. I wanted to have a bit of adventure. So that was before the internet. So I decided to just up and leave with no money and nowhere to go. And I ended up in England, where I met my wife, my current wife, my only wife, who is from Dunkeld up here. And we fell in love, and that was 22 years ago. Then when it was time to decide where we would live, I really liked Italy. I wanted to go back in a way, but at the same time, by that time I had learned to speak English, whereas my wife would have struggled to come to Italy and work and function without speaking Italian. So I decided to come up to Scotland, here in Perthshire, where we still are. And we've been here ever since, really. I don't know if I'm going to go back.
There'll be a lot of people thinking, Milan or near Milan, Perthshire, but it's a beautiful part of the world. In fact, it got me thinking, what are the comparisons about where you were brought up and Perthshire? Because they're both rural areas, I guess.
Yes, that's right. The rurality of it, and also the feeling of small community that, especially in Dunkeld, where I've never really lived in Dunkeld as such, but when my wife's Lara's parents were in Dunkeld, I did have that feeling of small community that was really much the same to what I was used to at home. And I like that very much. That coupled with the fact that obviously it's a beautiful part of the world. And by the time I came up here, I think we must have had a good summer that year, because I decided that it was a good idea to stay. Lo and behold, 20 years later, I've experienced some extremes of weather that I wasn't really particularly used to, but I'm still very much in love with that part. Although we don't live with it, we stay in Skun now, which is different from Dunkeld. But there is still, in the meantime, what was happening was that here in Scotland, you can still live and have the feeling that you are in a place that is is okay for a person to stay in Scotland. I think the pace is still quite livable, quite manageable, and people are mannerable. Whereas at the same time in my town, what's happened is at the antithesis of what people think Italian life is, and with the swallowing of the place from Milan, that is kind of expanding, is becoming a very frenetic urban area. That feeling of community has disappeared, I think, from the places where I was born and brought up. And I used to visit all the time, and I was saddened by seeing this happening. So when it came to really deciding where I wanted to stay, I felt that here it was still a place that I could recognize myself, and I could bear myself being constantly faced with. Whereas at home, I just kept feeling that the place was being stripped away from the way it was and from the way I liked it. So that's why I'm still here.
I think the trick is, if you see parts of Scotland at their best in the best weather, you absolutely fall in love with them, because you know what they can be like. Yeah. Whereas if you were there where it's absolutely pouring down all the time, maybe it's not the best introduction. But that's interesting. I think a lot of that's to do with childhood as well, isn't it? If you go to a place where you've been brought up and there's been big changes, it is different to going to somewhere that you don't know. And so your memories and your ideas of what it'll be like are different.
100%. I felt that if by leaving the place, I could preserve it in my memory forever. And I could bring up my family with the values that were dear to me when I was brought up. Whereas if I stayed at the rate it was changing at, that beautiful memory would have completely just dissipated eventually, and I would have been just different as a result. So I'm glad I did it, actually, to be honest.
So I think you've said you didn't have a particularly musical family, but you still got into music quite young. Well, for me, it's young. So how did you get into music to begin with?
Well, funnily enough, but listening to my music now, you wouldn't think it. But I listened to Bruce Springsteen, and when I was like 8 years old, and I thought, this is so cool. And then just at the same time, my mom and dad bought a bar they split the bar, because I was a big bar, and they bought it with my auntie and uncle, and their kids were a bit older than me, and one of them was a little bit weird, because although he was only a teenager, he was big into jazz, and he had a library just as big as the one that I see behind you there, full of jazz records. And he was only a teenager, you know. For me, he was a big boy, but he was a teenager, and he just got me. I went from Bruce Springsteen to Miles Davis within a couple of months, and then I just became just completely enamored with music, not knowing anything about it. You know, I couldn't read music, and I didn't know anyone who was a musician. But I started writing songs, and you know, sometimes they're the best ones that you're ever going to write are when you don't know anything about how you're meant to do it. And in fact, when I was still just a teenager, then I met this other guy who was also a very young lad, but unbeknown to me, he recorded my stuff, and he sent away little demo tapes to all the record companies. He never told me this. And then what happened is I got a phone call when I was out playing with my pals. I got a phone call from the guy that wrote Volare, you know that famous Volare. By then, obviously, he wasn't active as a composer, and he was in recording. He was very involved in record labels and things like that. And he wanted to sign me up, but he phoned and he got my dad on the phone. And he told him where to go because he thought it was a prank call. But then so they wrote me a letter, and it was true. So they signed me up, and so before I knew it, I didn't do any of the stages in between. You know, before I knew it, I didn't know anything about music, and I was signed to a record label. So I think that kind of messed with my head the wrong way. Because I had everything to learn. I was already there, and I had everything to learn. So that's when I decided eventually that I thought, and I wanted to kind of go away. And when I found myself in Scotland, I had to start from the very, 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 very bottom. And I still kind of pretty much there. So, although I've learned a lot since.
But that's such a fascinating story. I mean, that's, you know, because Volare in some ways is almost like a, you know, second national anthem, or so. It's that famous.
Yeah.
So
well, in fact, a lot of people wanted it to be the national anthem.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's a fantastic song. Yeah. And one of the guy, there are two of them. There's Modugno and Migliacci. Migliacci was the guy, and I have never been to his house, but I've been to the house next door. And when I say the house next door, they used to have hills, the whole hill in Rome. And another guy who's a very famous, I won't name him, but he's a very, very, very famous Italian singer-songwriter. And he's got the hill next door. And I went to his house, because they were parading me around like a little prized possession when I was, just because I was like a teenage boy that was singing these songs that were kind of rooted in jazz without knowing anything about jazz. And they took me to his house, and I dressed to perform, to just and they all sat this famous, they all sat in front of me just to hear me sing these little stupid songs, and I dressed. I mean, I attempted to be as elegant as I could, and they used to take the piss out of me. They were all in their shorts and t-shirts. They said, "What are you doing dressed like that?" I thought it was so. Anyway, I'm digressing, but
that was really interesting. The idea of having, because, you know, a lot of people, to make those connections, some people go through their whole musical careers and not make those connections, but to have it at such a young age, and as you say, maybe without the knowledge or the experience that you needed to make the most of them, or just you know, enjoy it, I guess.
Yeah, no, I did enjoy it in a way. It just felt so different from what I was used to. That, you know, those were the days where people bought records, and as a result of which record labels were really rich. And in fact, you know, they were paying me really well for doing pretty much nothing, really. It was just so that nobody else would sign me, basically, at that time. And I just didn't understand that concept. And I think even my family struggled with it, because when the contracts were coming through, I mean, it was good money, and they were thinking, what's going on here? You know, that was, but in hindsight, it was fantastic experiences, but it's very fickle. It's very, but it was quite nice at the time, I suppose.
I guess it does to a family or to yourself. It would sound too good to be true, to basically being, you know, offered contracts not to do, you know, what.
100%. I think that they themselves realized, what are we going to do with this guy now? He doesn't know anything. I think it's just too little. I was a little boy. So, but yeah, that's how it started. But certainly the love for music, it was there straight away at the beginning. I just couldn't contextualize it. You know how some people write beautiful passages. You know, sometimes you read what your children have written in their homework at primary 4, and you think you're a literature genius, but you don't know anything about it. And it was exactly the same thing.
Yeah, and but were you playing instruments by this point? Were you actually playing? Because it's a different, you know, I got into jazz fairly early as well, maybe not as young as that, but certainly, and it's a big leap from listening to Miles Davis to trying to play something a bit, you know, along those lines.
Yeah, 100%. I played the guitar a little bit, but it didn't sound anything like that. Although I was trying to, you know, kind of swing it with keeping 1 chord or 2 chords, 3 chords at the max, but that didn't matter, because as soon as I started working, they coupled me up with people that, you know, were super musicians, and that's when I got into music properly, because my first mentor was a double bass player. I never even seen a double bass in my life, but when I was spending prolonged periods of time at his house, and the double bass was there, and I was kind of tinkling away, and the sound sort of got me straight away. You know, you hear different instruments and you hear different sounds, and there is always one instrument that you think, yeah, that's the sound that I like. You know, my heart responds to that more so than, I never liked the guitar, but it was means to an end, because it was the easiest way to get songs out, type thing. I was terrible. I've always been terrible at the guitar. It's just something that, you know, there are too many strings and they're too close together.
So at this point, were you starting to learn the double bass?
Yeah, but then again, you know, but then it took a lot of time to have the money to buy one, and then to have the discipline to really learn it seriously. Because even when I started playing, I found that, yeah, I could learn basic stuff and play rockabilly until the cows came home, but I still had a notion to cross to be able to play, for instance, jazz, or even to know why I'm playing a certain note, and what that means in the context of music and rhythm and blah blah blah. I'm still nowhere near where I would like to be. Like, nowhere near. It's a lifetime pursuit.
So when you decide to travel, Now, it's one thing traveling with a ukulele, another with a double bass. I take it you didn't.
No, I didn't have it.
No,
No, I didn't have it. In fact, I stopped playing for a long time because when I decided to come away, I was sort of in between contracts, and I was approaching like kind of the age where you can drink at the pub on your own, and I decided, oh no, this is not for me, and things are taking too long, and also at the time in Italy we had the national service, and I was never particularly enamored with the idea of the military, and it wasn't a factor of discipline, because we were brought up with discipline. We were brought up to behave. We didn't need to go and be shouted at by some guy in a uniform in order to do what we were told, because we knew how to do what we were told, because that's the way we were brought up. So I didn't feel that I needed to go in the military, and I was what they called at that time a conscientious objector. So in order to do that, you had to be taken away and kind of given community service. And what they gave me was a year doing care of the elderly and care of disabled people. And I loved it, to the extent that I wanted to be a nurse. And that's what I decided to do. But when I looked at it, in Italy, you had to be able to speak English to do part of the course. So that's how I decided that I'll just go away. I'll learn to speak English by living in Great Britain, and at the same time I'll get away from the music, so I don't have to sign the next contract, and they'll never find me again, because the internet wasn't there. You know, it's not like you didn't have, if you didn't want to be found, you could totally
yeah, of course. They can't track your phone, or they can't.
No, I didn't have a phone. There was no mobile phone. In fact, the first person I met with a mobile phone was when my wife came to Birmingham. She had like a primordial version of the mobile phones with a little aerial sticking out. And she had one of them, and I thought, wow, how fancy is that? She must be rich. But yeah, we didn't have any of that. And all that happened is that when the next contract came to the house via post, my mom, you still phoned with the phone box, and my mom says, "Oh, what do I do?" I said, "I'll just ignore it," and that's it. That was the end of that. Now I don't think you could do that. They'll find you within like 2 seconds.
So you're now, you moved to Britain, and you end up in Perth. So how does the music begin again for you? Do you start playing yourself, or are you around musicians? Are you listening to stuff locally?
No, I didn't know anyone really, and I didn't decide anything. I just missed it in a way, and so what happened is I had time, and I had also a level of English that, by the time I learned to speak the language, I sat down and I wrote some songs that were like kind of comedy songs, and they were taking the mick out of the conversation that I was overhearing when I was going to the pubs, and there was this sort of macho culture, that used to be prevalent at the end of the 90s and in 2000 in pubs and things. And maybe still there now. I don't know. I don't go to pubs, but I used some of that conversational things, and I put them in little songs. And I started going to a couple of open mic nights, just singing this couple of songs, just to see what would happen. And what did happen is that, I don't know, just complete fluke, luck. But before I knew it, I was being given gigs, and I started getting gigs at festivals and things like that. And I still was just me, myself with a little acoustic guitar. I was really struggling to make things that had really any musical sense. They were all right, but they sounded terrible to me, and it probably sounded terrible really in objectively, but at least they got me onto the scene, and I started meeting musicians like that. So when I knew enough musicians, I started asking, would you fancy playing with me? And I could play the double bass. and then I get drummers and guitarists, and so we started playing the same sort of kind of comedy things, but in a kind of rockabilly, swingabilly version. And we did more festivals and things like that. And then I did more double bass work with other people, which was great for me because I didn't particularly like to go and sing comedy songs. I did it because it got me gigs and it got me out of the house, but I never really thought, this is what I really want to do. And so on and so forth. I mean, fast forward many years, then this is where we're at now, and I play more. I was playing more, but not now. Now they've got no gigs whatsoever.
But were you aware, because the album has got a kind of fusion of your Italian roots, but also the Scottish traditions as well. And were you aware of Scottish kind of traditional and folk music before you came over, or was that new to you?
No, it was completely new to me, because probably for it was in those times you wouldn't discover music unless you were at the record shop.
Sure.
So the record shop near where I was didn't have any folk music, classical, opera, jazz, pop, rock, metal, those kind of categories. I never. If it did have folk music, I must have bypassed it. But what I found when I came here was obviously a thriving Scottish scene, but also got more and more and more into world music. So I started to listen to a lot of music from Cuba, from the Caribbean, from Africa, and I thought it would be really amazing to meet more people that play music that is far away from the charts and from genre as such. And I mean, in Scotland, there's certainly a fantastic array of musicians. They're everywhere. And I was lucky enough to, when I was still doing my little comedy songs, I was lucky enough to play in places like Shetland and Orkney, and like everybody there, whether they're driving the bus or making chips or whatever, they're way better musicians than you'll ever be. And you think, wow, that's great. So yeah.
No, it's an incredible way to find out about, going to these festivals. It's not only performing, but you're meeting and you're connecting with all these other people. And the other strand of that is the kind of, for me anyway, the recent increase in the popularity of jazz and the fusion between all different types of music as well, which makes your album, I think, stand out as a great example of that. Was that something that, that you slowly discovered, or was it with the musicians that you ended up working with?
Yeah, you start meeting musicians that they open you to different perspectives, and also through the musicians you meet, they will mention somebody else that they've worked with or they played with. So then you go and check them out, and you think that they're pushing the envelope farther in another directions that you hadn't thought about. And I never ever I've listened to people thinking I wanna do that too, but I always listen and think, wow, that's fantastic, and then maybe I suppose you take some elements of those ideas without taking the actual idea into what you do. But I'm forever in complete awe of people in Scotland. You don't even need to go too far away from Scotland to just find just fantastic people that play not to become famous or well known, or they just play because they love it and they just do wonderful things. There's a bit of everything. There's stuff that is not great, but like everywhere. But there's a lot of people that are unbelievable. Way better than what I'll ever be. And I like that.
Well, brings us finally to talk about Insieme We Stand, which I think, was it written and recorded during COVID?
Yeah, so the writing of it was properly during lockdown because of what was happening because it started off, in March 2020, before things got bad here. They got really bad in Italy, and in and around my town was where they started off being ridiculously bad. And there are a number of reasons for that. I think that the main culprit is the fact that there is a total absence of community health care. So everything is hospital based, and because there isn't anybody to to call if you're not very well at home, then everybody just flocked at the hospital. The hospitals couldn't cope. There were people dying left, right, and center. But the very image that around which the whole thing pivoted was seeing the convoys of military lorries that were taking coffins away from the hospitals, because even the whole region couldn't cope with the amount of dead bodies. Now that's something that we're still in the midst of it, and now we're really trying to stop talking about it and get out of it and start living our lives, and that's absolutely fine. But at that time, I felt so awful, and I felt like we were leaving an important part of history that couldn't really be left untold. So I started, but there was some good of it, because I could see that my mom is still there, and she's on her own, and she was saying that the community was kind of pulling together, and they were doing our shopping, and they were doing things that they used to do back in the days. So there was some good to come out of that. So I just started from that viewpoint, and I was over here, so I thought I could write something that includes Scotland and the culture and the music of Scotland, but also that include that language that is now hardly ever spoke, that is my dialect, and those elements of living in a community that were so dear to me, and they're still there apparently. So that's how it.
So that's how the kind of writing came about.
That's how the writing went.
Yeah.
And the recording had to be, there was a bit in the middle between lockdowns when it was okay to meet within reason. So you could travel to Glasgow, which I did, and a friend of mine called Andrea Gobbi, he is a recording engineer and a producer, and he produced the album, and also a small core of musicians. There was Anna Massi, plays the guitar and other things, and John Somerville that plays the accordion, and Stevie Fivey that plays the drums. We could actually play the nuts and bolts of the album live in a studio, although in 3 different booths, so that we were in kind of in close proximity to one another. So that was it. That was the first part of the recording, and then all the other instruments, then it was like full on lockdown again. So all the other instruments had to go into the studio on their own and put their little things. So Greg Lawson on violin and Ross Ainsley on the pipes and the whistles. They did things. They were live in there with us, not because we didn't want to, but because you couldn't do it. So that took a little bit longer, but it got there in the end, type thing.
And it's incredible to think that it was done during that year where there were all these restrictions, and it just shows you, what can be done even when there are these things against you. Maybe sometimes it becomes a plus because you have to work quickly or whatever, differently.
And there certainly was a willingness to do it. Yeah. Also, they were freer than they would have been in normal circumstances. Yeah. And also there was the support of Creative Scotland, which I'm very, very grateful for. Otherwise, when things get longer, they also get more expensive. So I wouldn't have necessarily been able to pay for it if I didn't have the support.
It's been interesting from my point of view. You mentioned how you don't have to go very far in Scotland to discover an incredible musician. And it does seem that a lot of people, it's become a real way of coping with the lockdown and with COVID, that musicians have found new ways to not just make music, but to release music as well. And it's changed a lot of people's ways of making it. It's been really quite inspirational.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
And the thing I love about your album is it does seem perfect for the time, because it seems to me it's about moving forward together. Is that a kind of theme that's there?
Yeah, that's what I really, really wanted to communicate. And the challenge would have been communicating it through music, where it's obvious that like 99.99% of the people listening to it won't have a clue what is being said. But that was part of the idea. I didn't really want to, because I don't think that with words, especially when I'm trying to be serious or semi-serious, I'm not particularly good. So I just wanted it to sound a way that people would understand that what it means is community, what it means is moving forward together, a positive message and things like that. it's kind of tough to express it in words, but I think in music it sort of comes across in a way. I mean,
it definitely does. As an album in a whole, it's uplifting. I think the music is really uplifting for it. Did you have particular inspirations when you were putting it together, or were there too many to name?
Yeah, no, probably musically speaking. So in terms of double bass sound and approach, I have always been a great lover of a guy called, he's dead now, called Charlie Hayden. And he was a very famous jazz player, but he released a string of albums with in a couple of different environments. One was the Liberation Music Orchestra, where he included influence from world music and Latin America, and made a sound jazz without really wanting to sound particularly jazz, but there was a cultural element attached to it. But I just loved his sound. I loved the fact that he wasn't trying to show off ever at any point, and it was all about the music. So that was a big inspiration. I didn't want to write anything where anybody would show off. And for goodness, all the people that are playing on it, they can show off, you know, definitely, but they didn't. They just played so musically beautifully, really. So that was a big inspiration. And no, I think otherwise musically, I tried to learn as much as possible about Scottish music without stealing anything from it, because I didn't want to be the foreign guy that tries to be Scottish. And I just wanted to pay respect to it without being like that. You know, what's he doing? Is he trying to be Scottish? Is he trying to fool? So hopefully I've managed to do that.
Well, I mean, I think it's a sensational album. I really do. I've been playing it so much since I got my copy. And I think I was thinking about traditional music in Scotland and how it's changing constantly. And I think particularly recently, it's kind of adopting other traditions as culture changes and the makeup of the people change as well. And I think And Same How We Stand is the perfect example of that, you know, where it is bringing traditions together and a kind of celebration of both.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I hope so. Yeah, I really wanted to do exactly that. So if that was communicated to you, that I'm very pleased, because that's exactly what I wanted to do. And also, I didn't want to do it in a way that it would only be understandable to musicians. I wanted it to be accessible. I just wanted it to be kind of a bunch of lovely songs in a way, or instrumentals. I didn't want it to be kind of highbrow, because I'm not at that level myself anyway. So it doesn't particularly matter. So I'm very pleased. I just don't know what I'm going to do next, but I'm very pleased with that one.
Well, is there any possibility of live shows, or have you even been able to consider that?
Yes, there is. However, it's so difficult because I've spoken to a lot of people, both in Scotland and especially in Italy, that as a principle, they would really love to see it performed live. But when it's time to nail down a date, we're not even going as far as talking money, because when it's time to just find a date, it's so difficult to say, when, I don't know. And especially for Italy, it's just like things keep changing, and you don't know what venues are going to survive. So I'd really like to perform it live anywhere, really. But yeah, hopefully. I think all the musicians have given they said, yeah, if you need us for a live version of it, they would be in principle up for doing it. So that's good. So I just need somebody to put us on.
There's lots of open space up in Perthshire. Surely we can find somewhere that we could do that. Well, if you do find a space, please let me know, because I would love to see this played live. I just think they're great songs, absolutely.
Great. Yeah, will.
And well, Roberto, thanks so much for taking time to have a chat today. I've really enjoyed it, and I do think the album's terrific.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it as well. Thank you.
And we'll be back soon with someone completely different.